I just parked my car. I have the opportunity to interview a really special person. The great aunt of the little girl that was kidnapped by Hamas and released in a hostage release deal, 4-year-old Abigail Edan. So now I'm going in to talk with her. I have an interview scheduled with her here at the AJC. Anyway, this woman's name is Hersh Naftali. I'm very excited. It's such an honor to meet her.
Floor 18.
I went that way.
Oh, no worries.
Thank you. Thank you.
Come on in.
Thank you.
They're right in the conference room.
Hi.
Hello, Hadass. So nice to see you.
So nice to see you too. Hi. Hi. It is an honor to be here at the AJC headquarters with Hersh Naftali. She's the great aunt of Abigail Moore Edan. And now you are here in the United States speaking as part of the 8 American hostages being held in Gaza. And you have a group, I understand.
Yeah, so on October 7th, 12 Americans were taken hostage. And of those 12, Abigail was 3 years old. After a couple weeks, 2 hostages, Americans from Chicago area, were released, a mother and her daughter, and they were not Israeli at all, but they were just American. And Abigail and another American, Liat Benin, were both released in the only hostage release deal that took place at the end of November of 2023 and the beginning of December. And Abigail was the first American to get out, and she came out on the 3rd day, and that was a hostage deal that was put together by President Biden and with the Qatari mediation. After that, no more hostages came out. So there are 8 American hostages that we still have who are in Gaza. And while it's an American group, we refer to them as the American 8, because really important for the American population to understand that there are 8 Americans that are still being held hostage somewhere in Gaza.
Are we talking about this enough?
No, we're not. You and I are talking about it, but people aren't talking about it enough. I mean, I was telling you before, I listened to the news and people are talking about crowd sizes at a convention or crowd sizes at a rally when we have Americans that are hostage and we have a ceasefire deal that we're all pushing for so that the hostages can be released and that people who are living in Gaza, the Palestinian people in Gaza, can also have relief and have humanitarian aid. So here we are. Our press is talking about the amount of people that were in a rally, and we have American hostages. So when you say, are we talking about it enough? We're not. And I think we as hostage families are doing everything we can. We had a family that spoke at the RNC.
Omer.
Yeah. So Omer Nutra's parents spoke at the RNC a few weeks ago, and that was a great opportunity so that Americans could hear about the 8 American hostages. And we will do something very similar, which is having a speaking opportunity at the DNC in a week, and also to have that. But the thing that I talk about is this isn't a Republican or a Democrat.
Right.
This isn't a West Coast, East Coast, middle of the country. These are just Americans. And so when we talk about it and when we look towards the American public, what we're saying is this is an American problem. It should not be an election issue that divides us. It should actually just be something that everybody agrees that American hostages, all the hostages, but American hostages should come home immediately.
How is Abigail doing? I think everybody's curious. What has it been like since she got released? What is her demeanor like? Is she talking about what she's been through?
For beginners, she's a 4-year-old. And so one of the things that we've been very careful, and one of the reasons why I don't do a lot of speaking is because of that question. Because while it is what everybody wants to know, the truth is that she's a 4-year-old and we're trying to keep her life very normal considering everything. And, keep in mind that she has a 6-year and 9-year-old brother and sister who on that day also watched both their parents be murdered. And they're 6 and 9. And they locked themselves in a closet for 14 hours until they could be rescued. And so I think about Abigail and I think about her brother Michael and her sister Amalia, and they are doing really well because they have aunt and uncle and cousins who they live with and have become their family. And they are beautiful together, and they're young kids. But what we all know is that what we don't see on the outside is what's going on the inside. And look, they talk about it when it's right for them to talk about it. But it is almost a year. It is horrific. I think for so many of us adults that we think about it from an adult perspective, and it's really hard to understand what it feels like or what it would be like to be a 4, a 6, and a 9-year-old. But all I can say is that my niece and her husband, who are raising them with their 3 beautiful children, are the most incredible human beings, and they all have this beautiful, cohesive bonding. And so, when you say, how's Abigail doing? Abigail's wonderful because she's being loved. Michael and Amalia are wonderful because they have so much love. So I think that's the part that we go with right now. But of course, we will see what happens when, people grow up and what the effects are of having seen something as horrific as they experienced.
How's your niece doing raising the family? And the decision obviously must have been easy for them, but it's also a big responsibility to take on.
Every family is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But what I will say about my niece and her husband is that they are the most incredible people. But what I will say is their 3 children, who are twins, are 12, and they just turned 13. The twins are 13 and their daughter's 10. But basically the kids, right in the beginning, said to their parents, they're coming to live with us. So it wasn't even like my niece and nephew had to go. It was the children that said they're part of us. And they'd grown up on the kibbutz together, and they were all very close. So when you see them together, they are like one family. You just see everybody taking care of each other, and the little ones sometimes taking care of the big ones, and the big ones taking care of the little ones. And my niece and her husband, Liron and Zoli, are 2 of the most amazing people.
Since they can't live on the kibbutz, where are they now? How are they coping?
So, like most families, they're not back on the kibbutz. In their case, they have moved to a place in the middle of the country where they have a small home, and the kids are going to school, and they're just trying to rebuild their lives. I mean, if you think about a lot of these families, we forget sometimes. Again, we go back to what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. I think it's about 250,000 Israelis have been displaced between what happened on October 7th along the Gaza border and what's happening in the north along the Lebanese border. People that live in both of those regions are not living in their homes. They're refugees of sorts in different parts of the country. So the one thing that I have seen and is a beautiful part of the Israeli culture is, how do you get children back into school? How do you get them back into camps? And that is something that people to people are being done throughout the country. And that's, what for my niece and nephew has been most important, is to make sure that they get back into a routine and they have friends and they do fun things.
Yeah, and it's important for people to know. My understanding is that the entire northern part of Israel, they shut down school because they had to evacuate everybody, with the intention that they will do school elsewhere this year. And that's so difficult. That is so hard. Mm-hmm. It's already been a year of war almost, definitely a full school year of war, and now we're going into the second year.
Look, it is one of the stories of Israel. And I think that the part that I go back to is that the Israeli people are resilient. The Israeli people are going to fight for their right to exist and their right to survive. But in the meantime, what they are very cognizant of, the people and the communities, is that these children need to have some normal existence. And what I've seen and what I hear is, like, they have put together different schools. They've joined other schools that are currently in existence. Some have moved to other kibbutzes, and they are going to school with those kids. So while it is horrific, the one thing that we've always been as a nation of Jewish people is taking care of our children.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the fact that you are here to talk about Screams Before Silence, which is Sheryl Sandberg's film about the sexual violence that happened on October 7th. It is a movie that is free on YouTube, and you can watch it right now for free from the comfort of your own home. But they are having a screening here in suburban Philadelphia, and you're here to talk about I guess there's connections with the people from the kibbutzim that are shown and the people that you know.
Look, the thing about October 7th, and then we'll talk about the movie and the subject, everybody in Israel knows somebody who has been affected. Everybody knows somebody who's been kidnapped. Everyone knows somebody that was killed. It's a country that is interrelated. And the movie is, I've seen it now twice. And it's not because you want to see this movie twice, but there's a lot to understand, and it's horrific. And, I go back to what took place on October 7th was an incredible carnage, kidnapping, but what we sometimes don't always get to is that there was a lot of rape and physical and sexual abuse. And this movie has people who witnessed it and were there, and also a young woman who was taken hostage and experienced very abusive behavior. So I think it's really important for people to go and to see this. I think to see it sometimes in community is perhaps better than to be alone at home. But I think it's a subject that we have seen many people not accept, not discuss, and these are people, mainly women, that I'm upset by, that haven't looked at this and said, this is just another story. that they have normally been very upset about rape and abuse of women, and here it's almost been not talked about. And so, I also will just say that I went a couple months ago to the UN when they had their hearing on the findings of Ms. Patton after having gone to Israel. And she basically came back and said there were signs and there were examples, and she researched it, and there was abuse and there was rape. And so this movie is an opportunity for people to understand what happened. And part of the reason why I do what I do is because so much of the truth has been pushed aside by others. And if we don't speak out and Sheryl Sandberg's movie doesn't keep getting shown and screened, what we'll find is that people will say, skip October 7th. And we can't skip it because it is, as we all know, it is the greatest day of tragedy for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. And then I'll just add one other thing, which is there are still women who are being held hostage in Gaza. And these are young women. And two of these young women are from the same kibbutz as Abigail, and the same kibbutz that starts off that movie. And these are two young women, and we know that women are being abused and raped. We've heard it, not only stories, but the people that were released at the end of November in that one release have come back and have talked very clearly about what women are experiencing. That was 260 days ago. We don't know we don't know what's going on.
What do you want people to understand about what is happening? I remember in the film, there's one part that really stuck with me where Sheryl Sandberg asked to see some of the photos of the sexual abuse and the rapes, and she was so shocked. Obviously, they made the editorial decision not to show those photos, but you can see that it really moved her.
Yes, and obviously we as viewers of the movie didn't see that. But I had been to an exhibit in Israel, a small exhibit, about 5 months ago. And one of the things that was shown was exactly what happened to women. And, it was reported in the New York Times, so it's not something that people don't know happened. But when you actually see the videos or you see the photos of the actual abuse to women in their genitals and into their body parts, and you understand what happened, but then to actually see it, there's just no words for it. I mean, it is the cruelest, most disgusting thing that I can imagine, and I did see photos of it when I was there. It really happened. So I can understand, while she didn't show it, that she was physically shocked and unable to actually say much because it's just so horrible.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges, is that when you don't see it, it's hard to imagine how horrible it was. Why do you think we are still having to struggle with believing Israeli women?
It's a really good question. I think that there is a narrative that was really hard to break right after, which was to not accept what happened in Israel on October 7th across the board. And one of the reasons why I speak out and I talk about what happened to Abigail's mother and father, who were brutally murdered in front of their children that morning by Hamas terrorists in their house, right outside of their house, is because if I don't say that, people will not understand that that's what happened for 3 little children that morning. 3 little children. It could be 3 little children here in Philadelphia in one of these suburbs, and that would be their morning. I mean, think about the numbers. That day, 1,200 people were murdered. If you put that into our numbers, that's almost 40,000 people, okay, in America.
United States, yeah.
In the United States. If you think about the 40 Americans that were murdered that day, that would be like waking up and finding 1,200 Americans were murdered that day.
Right, percentage of the population-wise.
Exactly. You think about the 300-plus kids, young people, not kids, but young people at the Supernova Music Festival. 300, more than 300. But
364.
But if you do the same math, we're talking 10,000 young people. That's going to an entire campus and saying they didn't exist. They were all slaughtered.
It's like a portion of Burning Man, if you would think of Burning Man. I don't understand why some people don't realize that if it happened at Burning Man, then everybody would be up in arms.
Well, think about it. Over the weekend, they had the Taylor Swift concert where they understood that there was a terrorist attack planned. Again, 2 young people, but a terrorist attack. They canceled the show because they had real credible information. There were going to be in that audience 200,000 people over 3 days, okay? God forbid it happened there. Can you imagine in Austria what the response would have been? So there is a double standard.
And that's what it means to globalize the Intifada. That's what people are That's what people are saying. That's what we don't want to happen.
No, and listen, terrorism anywhere is unacceptable. It is horrible. But what I'm trying to remind people is that what happened on October 7th was just terrorism. It was something that cannot be replicated and is not acceptable anywhere in the world. And sometimes there is a double standard that we see, that what happened in Israel, and that goes back to your original question, like if it happened in Israel, you don't talk about it the same, but that is a double standard, because rape, using women's bodies for war, using women's bodies for anything, should be unacceptable anywhere in the world. And, I'll go back to this other interesting part is, like, think about these hostages that were taken and these people that were murdered in Israel on October 7th. They were multinationals. They were people from over 25 nations, over 5 religions, babies, older people. It isn't.
There were Arabs and Bedouins.
Well, there's Arabs and Bedouins that are still. There's a few Bedouins that are still there. There were young people that had just come in from Africa to study farming. There were Thai workers, Philippine workers. Everybody was slaughtered. They didn't care.
Yeah.
And so this isn't an Israel situation. It isn't a local situation. It is something that cannot happen anywhere in the world. And that's why, for me, this is really a humanitarian crisis, because what happened was about humans. And humans anywhere in the world, terrorism is not acceptable, killing is not okay, the rape is not okay. All these things are just not acceptable. And so, when we talk about it, we need to be very clear and just make it very clear statement about what happened on October 7th in Israel. And unfortunately, what is still happening, especially with these women hostages that are still in Gaza now at 312 days.
Can you just talk a little bit about, I think it's fascinating that you were with the UN as they were talking about the findings. Was there anything that surprised you with that?
I prefer to kind of go to the point about what wasn't surprising. What wasn't surprising was that actually they did go and they did do a review. And why it isn't surprising is because I really do think that the Secretary General understands that there has been rape and there has been atrocious behavior. So I think for him it was important to go and do this. I don't want to get into what the Security Council and who said and what said. It's all, people can go out and find that for themselves. But what I think was important was that Ms. Patton and her research and what she could share was really important, because she actually gave voice to all the things that we've just talked about and what this movie talks about, which was and is that there was sexual violence that took place that day, and we know is continuing.
And it's so important for us to continue to talk about this, because there are still people in the streets that get airtime that don't believe it. And I think that's the whole point of this movie, to show it happened. I hate that we have to fight that's a fight that has to be done, that women aren't just believed. But that's one of the things that you're also talking about at the screening, because I understand that this was your kibbutz, or this is Abigail's kibbutz, and that one that you knew well. This could have been anybody.
Yeah, look, I go back to what you said, which is everyone has a right to their own opinion. They just don't have a right to their own facts. And the facts are what happened on October 7th. And the irony of it is that most of what we're discussing, Hamas terrorists actually filmed on their own GoPro cameras. So most of the evidence that we've seen that people go by is from their GoPro cameras, both what they then posted very happily on forms of social media, but that also they dropped or we found when the Israelis were in Gaza.
They're very proud.
They've shown that they're proud, but through that work. But so when you talk about the level of what happened, and you talk about the way it was documented, this was actually documented by the perpetrators of this most heinous crimes.
Yeah, when they ask about where's the video coming from, it's coming from themselves.
A lot of it has come from them, yeah.
Yeah.
And look, at where we are today, and part of, I think, goes back to why this movie is important, because it tells a truth. And you can see, even without seeing the pictures and without seeing the videos, you can see the people that experienced what they found, what they saw, some of the people that survived that were hiding, and what they heard. If you listen to this movie, you understand the seriousness of the crimes and the rape and the abuse that took place on October 7th.
Do you think there's going to be a better understanding as time goes on?
I think the most important thing that we can do is keep talking about the truth. And I think we have to keep having conversations that are very difficult. and conversations with people that may not always agree, but I'm not somebody that believes that we shouldn't talk. I'm somebody that believes we need to keep talking. I'm a cautious optimist. I believe that if you're entrenched and you don't talk, that's when you're not going to make any progress. So for me, part of being here talking with you, speaking with you, and speaking with others, and a lot of the work that I've been able to do and the American hostage families have been able to do is that here in America, we've kept this nonpartisan. So we have been working with Republicans and Democrats who have, on both sides of the aisle, been the majority extremely, extremely supportive and come together to say the hostages must be released. But that goes beyond. We've spoken with people from different communities, the evangelical community, Jewish people from very reformed to very religious, people in the Muslim community, people in the Black community, the Latino community, anybody. We are here to talk, because we are people whose lives have been completely altered. And in these cases of the American 8, their loved ones haven't even brought back so they can even start to move forward. And they're already wanting to have these conversations. Because what we've understood is that if we don't have these conversations, we can't move forward.
I've heard that also from Israelis, that nothing can happen. The war can't end. Nothing can happen until everybody is brought home.
Exactly.
And then, because that's how you can heal. You can't heal if you're still in the middle of it.
Yeah, I mean, like for our family, my niece and her husband were murdered that morning. The minute that Abigail, we knew that she was a hostage, you sit there and you wait. You sit there and you wonder. And all you can do is hope that this 3-year-old child, is going to come home. And in our case, it was a miracle that was brought on by the work of President Biden and his staff, his team, and the Vice President, and Jake Sullivan, and Defense, Mr. Austin, and CIA Director Burns, and Secretary of State Blinken. I mean, everybody worked and so hard to bring that deal, and the Qataris worked so hard. And like I said earlier, the Israelis and Hamas, they leaned in. They had the political will at that time to release 105 women and children. The minute Abigail came home, as horrible as it is that her parents were murdered, the minute that she came home was the beginning for my niece, my nephew, my sister-in-law, for our family at large to begin to heal. And in the case of the 8 American families, who are part of 120 families whose loved ones are still somewhere in Gaza, they can't even move forward. And then you think to yourself, like, everybody in Israel knows somebody. So while families are in trauma, Israel as a country, its soul, it's like an open wound. It's in trauma. The people there, and I've been there a bunch of times since October, and life continues. But you can feel a sense of trauma, and you can feel a sense of not being able to move forward because we still have 120 hostages that are in Gaza.
And I would argue that American Jewry worldwide actually cannot begin to heal until everybody is home.
Perhaps. I think you're right. I mean, look, it goes back to after you leave Israel, everybody in America and the Jewish diaspora knows somebody, has somebody. But what they also know is that this is a human issue. So even if it's a person who is not Jewish, but they are in Gaza, or it is a person who is a Muslim, or a Bedouin, or a Thai, or anybody that is there, it's a human story. Yes, it is that they're in Israel, and that's where they were taken, and then they are now hostages in Gaza. But I think for the Jewish soul, it goes to the point of, yes, these are people that were in Israel that were kidnapped, but it's just this humanitarian crisis that we understand has not been resolved. These people have not come home. So I kind of look at it and I think to myself, it goes even beyond that. You look at the evangelical community, you look at so many communities that really care about these hostages, and they are every day also out in the fight to support the release of these hostages, and they can't really move forward. That's where they are stuck also.
Yeah. Tell me if I'm wrong, but the deal, I understand, it's not a deal for all of the hostages, is it? It's a deal for some of them.
There's different phases. What I will say is that we right now have no deal. There's 120 people. There is a deal that will start, and it can start immediately. The Prime Minister said it can start immediately. He said it to our faces. We met with him a week and a half ago. He acknowledged that if there was a deal that was signed, hostage release could happen right away. And where I'm at, and I think most people understand, is like, we have to start. We can't wait for the only deal that brings everyone home. What we have right now is, for over 250 days, no hostages have come out. For 250 days, nobody in Gaza has had relief. So we need to start a deal. But my hope and my belief is that through the leadership of the American government, with the Qataris, the Egyptians, that we start this release, we start to see women. There's 2 children still in Gaza. We see children, we see women, we see the wounded, we see the elderly. We see them come out. And then you'll also see men come out. But what we know is that every day that they don't come out, and we've heard this over the last months, they're dying. So when you ask, I'm not a diplomat, and I'm not going to get involved in the negotiating, and we've been working with the U.S. government, but we don't negotiate. We don't tell them how to do this. That's their job. But what I can say as a human being is, if we don't start this, then we don't even start to get anybody out.
So what is the main point that you want to express as you come? You're going to speak to a group tonight after the screening of Screams Before Silence. What is the main point that you'd like to express to them?
I think really the takeaway is that it's all dependent upon all of us to do something about what happened on October 7th. Everybody has a role to play. My role here is to talk about what happened on October 7th to our family. My role is to speak to the movie and the subject of abuse of women and rape of women, because it's part of what happened, a huge part of what happened on October 7th, and it continues. And so for me, the role I play is to keep talking. And so for the place that I can play in this is to actually just tell the story and keep talking about it, and really invite other people to hear the story and keep telling that story, whether it's the story from the movie, whether it's our family story, but these stories, because if you think back and you look at the Holocaust, what do we have? We know how horrific it is, but it's the stories that we keep telling. And if we keep telling those stories, no matter who's against us or matter the headwinds, the stories will be the truth, and they will be part of our history. And what I've learned, and I think you know, is if we tell the stories and we talk about it and it becomes part of the history, we hope and we pray and we'll do everything we can to make sure it doesn't get repeated.
So my final question is, what can everybody else do as well?
I think truthfully right now is to do everything you can to talk about the hostages, the 8 American hostages, the 120 hostages that are all still in Gaza, and everybody can speak out. Every Sunday in New York City, there is a march or a run for the hostages. There are things like that are happening in all the different cities and different towns. And I think that is one way to show solidarity. Look, people can always give money. There's so much in Israel that is being done for the hostage families, or for families that are, victims of October 7th. There's so many ways you can donate. You can go to Israel and help them. You can go to Israel and volunteer. But I'm going to go to, if you're here in America, what can you do? Find ways to support the hostage families. And in most cities, there are activities that take place. But I think it's also sharing the stories and making very clear what happened on October 7th. And like I keep saying, there's still 8 Americans that are being held hostage. There's still 120 people who are being held hostage. They're from over 20 nations. They're from over 5 religions. People need to know that. If you can just start by telling people that story, then I think we've done something important here today.
And I just want to add that there is a specific reason why they are hosting this screening on Tisha B'Av. And with me is Marcia Bronstien, who is Regional Director of the American Jewish Committee, Southern New Jersey region for the AJC. Everybody can see this movie, but you specifically wanted to do a screening on Tisha B'Av, which is the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so many things befell the Jewish community on Tisha B'Av. So it was the first crusade where 10,000 Jews were murdered, and it was also the mass deportation of Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto. It was the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492, so we thought we would also use this as an opportunity because Hamas terrorists invaded Israel and so many people were killed at the Nova Festival. We felt it was an opportunity to share this film on this day, and we felt it was a sacred responsibility to have a showing and have a discussion.
Because it's like one among the big tragedies of the Jewish people.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Of course, most notably was the destruction of the first and second temples as well.
Yes, it's a very sad day of mourning for the Jewish people, and we felt that using this day and bringing people together would be an appropriate time to have this discussion and to share the film. It also gives us an opportunity to talk about the resilience of the Jewish community, and the Jewish community over the centuries has shown resilience, and we also plan to talk about that. And through Liz's story, we're going to show how the Jewish community comes together through tragedy. We come together and we use our tragedy and we turn it around because there are no other options.
Thank you so much, Marcia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for speaking about it, for bringing it to this community. And I'm really happy that, again, you're coming for the screening, but anybody that's watching this, just Google Screams Before Silence, and you can watch it on YouTube for free.
Yep.
So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can I give you a...
Yeah, I'd love it.